My name is Miriana, and I will be your MC for the day. But before we get into the kaupapa and the mahi, I'd like to invite Sione to open us up with a karakia.
Kia ora, Miriana. When we look around the world, we need peace. We need peace, love, and unity. You know, peace is the first prerequisites for health and well-being in the Ottawa Charter. And peace is mentioned also in the Geneva Charter. So this is a prayer for unity and peace. I'll say it in Te Reo and Te Reo Pākehā as well. E toku atua, e toku atua. Whakakotahitia ngā kau au pononga. Whakaaturia mai ki a rātou, ko tō puke tapu. A rātou o utura e he whai, me no hoki rātou I raro I ko kawenata. A whinatia mai rātou e te atua, I a rātou whakamātau. Tūko mai hoki ki a rātou, te kahai tō mai a rātou ki a koe. E te atua, kawarare waihio rātou ki a rātou ano. Engari ara kina mai o rātou tapu wae mā te maramatanga o te mātauranga. A ki a harakoa o rātou ngā kau ki tō aroha. Tūturu koe ko tō rātou pō āwhina. Ko rātou āriki hoki. O my God, unite the hearts of thy servants and reveal to them thy great purpose. May they follow thy commandments and abide in thy law. Help them, O God, in their endeavor and grant them strength to serve thee. O God, leave them not to themselves, but guide their steps with the light of thy knowledge and cheer their hearts by thy love. Verily thou art their helper and their Lord. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Sione, thank you for that. Kia ora anō whānau. Hope we're feeling good today. Welcome to our wānanga, our webinar. Just some housekeeping also before we start. So this session will be recorded if you weren't aware. Please keep your mic on mute throughout the session. It just makes it easy for the guest speakers so we don't get feedback and stuff like that. If you do have any questions, and we encourage questions, please place them in the chat and we'll give some time for the speakers to answer them later on. Speaker view is the best way to view the webinar, just so you can see who's speaking. And also I want to congratulate our winners, Nikki Taylor, Jess Goodman and Cole Fitzgerald. Thank you for your entries. Well done. Congratulations. I'm glad you're here with us today. And also, if you hear some heavenly voices, that will be Emma and Lavinia, who is also part of the team, and they're here to help out as well. So the kaupapa for this webinar today is the Geneva Charter for Wellbeing and the Future of Health Promotion in Aotearoa. Today's webinar is a sit back and relax, grab your cup of tea, discussion style session. Our expert panelists will explore and discuss how the Geneva Charter could potentially inform what health promotion in Aotearoa might look like in the future. Are we still an island isolated at the bottom of the world? Or is it time for us to include some global approaches to our health issues? Will this benefit us? And is Aotearoa ready? Or is it a case that the planet and people need us to unite now? Some potential questions for our experts. We have a mana-packed panel for you today, including Dr. Mihi Ratima and Dr. Viliame Puloka. But first up, we have Sione Tuitahi. Now, his CV is long, so I'm going to give you the short part. He is the Executive Director of Health Promotion Forum, which is us. He's an Honorary Senior Research Fellow at Otago University. He is the Chair of the IUHPE Global Working Group on Waiora Planetary Health and Human Wellbeing. He is a member of the Global Think Tank as part of UNICEF. He is a poet and a published author. And fun fact, he is the former lead singer in a rock band. So kia ora Sione, kei a koe.
Kia ora, Miranda. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that beautiful introduction. You forgot to mention that I no longer sing, so I have retired. In case you ask me to sing, only Viriami, our operatic singer, can still sing, so he might sing on our behalf. But tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Malo e lau maria, and it's wonderful to have you all. It's an honor for us, our team and our associates and co-workers and friends, Dr. Mihi Ratima, but also Professor Louise Signal is in the house. She just joined us, and last minute invitation to Louise. Thank you, Louise. And she might also have, if she wishes to, given the last minute invitation to contribute to our korero today. As Mariana said, the topic for today is the Geneva Charter for Wellbeing and the future of health promotion in New Zealand. And I do not have a PowerPoint. I only have a few notes and a few key ideas that I would like to share. And my aim here is to have a mind-to-mind and heart-to-heart conversation with you. As you know, the Geneva Charter is about well-being. And it's about the well-being of humanity and the well-being of the planet, quite distinct from the 1986 Ottawa Charter. The Ottawa Charter still talks about the environment, but not in the planetary way that is now being talked about around the world, including the Geneva Charter. The Geneva Charter is calling for building societies of well-being that are sustainable for humans and also for the health of the planet. That is the gist of the Geneva Charter. The Geneva Charter is part of a long process within the WHO system itself, but other partners have been contributing to the drafting and the approval of the Geneva Charter. And I'd like to speak to that background because it's important so that we see the interconnectedness of all the various contributions we make from Aotearoa, New Zealand, as a nation, as a health promotion community, other international organizations that we are part of, and also individuals. So it's about us individually, institutionally, and our respective nations around the world, and how we have had this journey in health promotion up to this point in time in the social evolution of humanity. And therefore, we understand the significance of the Geneva Charter and how we might use it to advance health and well-being through health promotion, as a professional field, as a tool for us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But equally important, our contribution to the rest of our human family, because we are in a global village, and we see that very clearly. Either it's the geopolitical conflict in Ukraine, or in Yemen, or in Syria, or in Afghanistan, and all of that. All these things are affecting us economically, politically, in terms of the inequitable distribution of wealth, power, and resources, and all of that. So a bit of a background to the Ottawa Charter. So our conversation here today, we are actually building our conversation and our work on the, we are standing on the arms, on the back of giants of our leaders who have come before us, and some are still with us, and some have left us. And I'd like to, at this point, to pay the tribute and the respect of the Health Promotion Forum to Dr. Moana Jackson. Moana Jackson has contributed significantly to health promotion, directly through his addresses, keynote addresses at various health forums, including the Health Promotion Forum Symposium some years back, and to other health promotion spaces that we have invited him to. A significant essence of his work is human rights, especially Indigenous rights. Some of the things that I'll share today and the work of the Health Promotion Forum are based on is actually related directly to the work that Moana Jackson has contributed over the years, including the 2007 United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And so now a story about the background that I shared. 2007, some of us from the Health Promotion Forum went to Vancouver. Mihi might recall, we met at the Longhouse. We had a brief chat, but you were organizing with Megan and others a satellite symposium for Indigenous peoples. And that was your effort to advance the work that Megan and you and others started in Melbourne to bring the voice of Indigenous peoples to the fore in the International Union for Health Promotion Forum, which is an international body that leads and advances the ongoing development of health promotion. Seme Sanduri was a keynote address in that conference in Melbourne 2004, and he launched Te Pai Mahutonga internationally in that forum. When we invited Seme Sanduri to our international conference 2019 in Rotorua, a conference that we co-hosted with the International Union, in abbreviation, it's known as IUHPE. We asked him, Te Pai Mahutonga was 20 years ago, and it might be time for a new framework. And Seme Sanduri gifted Aotearoa and the world Matariki with a combination of Te Pai Mahutonga. That work has not been out in a big way to the public yet, but it's something that we are working on. In 2007, the Health Promotion Forum, we are beginning to think about advancing planetary health, Indigenous rights, and health promotion, especially including Indigenous rights and planetary health, and to be led from Aotearoa, New Zealand, in the work of the IUHPE. And to cut a long story short, 2019, we co-hosted the conference in Rotorua. In that conference, two legacy statements came out. There was a general statement, the Rotorua statement, but there was also the Waiora Indigenous statement from the Indigenous participants at the conference. And it's so wonderful to connect up with Dr. Ratima today, with Mihi. Mihi was the editor of that legacy statement, and Professor Signal Lewis, who's in the house, was the editor of the general statement. After the conference, we established a global working group, which Mariana referred to in her introduction. It's the Waiora Planetary Health and Human Wellbeing Working Group of IUHPE, and I co-chair that working group. We have been able to put Indigenous health and Indigenous knowledge and planetary health and spirituality into the strategic documents of IUHPE. For example, the 5-year plan of IUHPE includes planetary health, Indigenous knowledge, and spirituality. Among our delegates that we invited to the 2019 conference in Rotorua were a delegation from WHO. And they were the same core group who co-drafted the Geneva Charter. So around October last year, they contacted us to host a conference at the 10th conference of WHO, which was held virtually in December, last December, that is. So we had two opportunities. The Health Promotion Forum had two opportunities to input to that conference. Firstly, through our Waiora Planetary Health Group, because IHBE was invited, and IHBE turned to our Global Working Group to conduct that workshop. And then secondly, our colleagues at WHO that I named earlier contacted us, invited us to offer a second workshop at the WHO conference. In addition to that, we were asked to review some documents that were related to the formation of the Charter, but also input to the Charter itself. So some of you might have read the Charter. You can see that planetary health is there. There's a call there to center Indigenous leadership and our knowledge as Indigenous peoples, not just New Zealand, but around the world as well. You can see also that spirituality, spiritual well-being, the dimension of health and well-being is included. So those are some of the inputs from us here at the Health Promotion Forum and our colleagues and our collaborators and co-workers, Dr. Ratima, and of course, Professor Signal, and a few others that we have been working very closely over the last 10 years or longer. And the last point from me at this point is to mention the Aotearoa accreditation framework that we have established to continue the advancement of health promotion in New Zealand. The IUHBE has got a global accreditation framework. It's largely based on its European experience in some parts of the world, and it's largely based on Western knowledge. We have negotiated with IUHBE, and IUHBE has approved that we come under the same system. It's global, but we incorporated Indigenous knowledge, Te Tiriti, and the socio-political context of Aotearoa, New Zealand, in our accreditation framework. So that is an important piece of work that we are starting in the next 1 year or so. You may see some new phases of development from us, and we'll share that with you. Those two pieces of work, our input to the Charter, input to the IUHBE accreditation framework, is a collective effort from the Health Promotion Forum and from colleagues and co-workers and friends that I have named before, for two major purposes. One, it is our Aotearoa contribution to health promotion at the international level. Two, those contributions will come back and help us here in our national context. In the global village where we are and where things are all connected, what happens at the global level impacts directly on the local level. It's very timely, and it makes sense for us to be able to contribute and co-lead the work at the international level, because it will come back and help us here, but also it will help other peoples around the world. So that's a bit of background of our contribution to the Geneva Charter. As I said, it's a charter focusing on well-being, human well-being, and the well-being of the planet. Similar to the Ottawa Charter, it has a clear aim, establishing well-being societies. Although it has not given a definitive description of what well-being is, you can see that there are elements of well-being that are factored into the Charter. It has 5 areas for focus, similar to the 5 action strands of the Ottawa Charter, and also a set of principles, under the heading foundations. And then finally, a call to the world to collaborate and to see that this is a societal, this is a social movement, everyone to participate. So at this point in time, we have helped to build our global house in health promotion. We have contributed. We have our knowledge in, our leadership is acknowledged. And so we have a tool that we can use to advance well-being in Aotearoa, given the big reform that we are facing and the global challenges that we face economically, environmentally, and of course the pandemics, and we can work together. So we shape the future that we want to walk into. We do not just walk into the future to a future that others make for us. We are guided by the wisdom of our elders, the wisdom of the past. We learn from that. And the challenges that we face today galvanize us to work harder and to work together. And we are inspired by the hope of the future, which we see through the radiant faces of our children, and for people like me who are koro, who are grandparents, through the faces of our grandchildren. They inspire us to work together and work harder. So that's a bit of background that I provide, and I'll hand it back to you, Mirella, but happy to answer some questions after our first round of the panel. Thank you, Mirella.
Well, thank you, Sione. Just a reminder to our guests today, if you have any questions, please put them up in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as we can. All right, next guest speaker is the well-known Dr. Mihi Rātama. She hails from Whakatohea in Ngāti Awa. Her CV is also very long, and I'll get to the ones that I can say the quickest. She is the director of Taumata Associates, a Māori health consultancy. She's the leading academic in Māori public health and kaupapa Māori research. She's a former associate professor in Māori health and director of Māori health research at the Auckland University of Technology. She's worked as a Commonwealth Fund Harkness Fellow at Harvard University and was a Fulbright Scholar at the University of New Mexico. Tēnā koe e mihi e te rangatira, kei a koe te atāmira.
Okay. Right, I'll just share my screen. Can you tell me if that's working?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, tēnā koe, ngā mihi atu ki a koutou, e whakapau o koutou kaha ki te hiki te oro te iwi tēnā koutou, ngā mihi ima mo tēnā kōrero aha kōko whakamātina rā koe, e mihi ki a koutou katoa. So thank you first to the Health Promotion Forum and Sione for the opportunity to come along and share some kōrero about this kaupapa. So I had the opportunity through the Health Promotion Forum to present at the, gone forward one, to be part of a panel, an Indigenous panel presentation at the 10th Global Conference on Promotion that was hosted by WHO in December, and the Charter was a product that came out of that. Hui. Thank you, Sione. You've covered all the background around the Charter, so I don't need to go into any of that, but I will just mention at the very start of the Charter, which you guys will have seen, I understand it's been sent out to you, it's released publicly a week or so ago. The first section is around the urgency to act, and it kind of sets the scene for the complex and interrelated crises, as they say, that are currently being faced around the world. And when I looked at the issues that had been raised in that section, they were very familiar and they resonated for me as expressing some of the historical and the contemporary experiences of Māori and other Indigenous peoples as a result of colonisation. So it talked about conflict, militarisation, population displacement, rapid urbanisation, fractures in society, environmental degradation, and about the widespread inequity that's being experienced, and that as a foundation for serious future crisis that we may expect to see. And it also talks about the type of approach that needs to be taken to addressing these issues, and that's an integrated approach that focuses on planetary, societal, community and individual well-being, as well as social change, structural change that's going to support self-determination, and also the redirection of societal values and action. So all very familiar when thinking about colonisation, decolonisation, and really what Māori have been saying for many years through political activism, but also many of the issues that are at the heart of the global Indigenous peoples movements. And then it took me back in time to about 25 years ago. I remember getting ready for work at AUT one morning and hearing on national radio an interview with Professor Sir Mason Jury. And he was asked about whether the impacts of colonisation and particularly the major inequities experienced by Māori, whether there was urgency to address those issues. And his response was, yes, it's urgent, and it's been urgent for at least the past 100 years. And so I guess one of the points that I'm making here is that while the Charter is presenting concerns about the current crisis that we're having, there's been a lot of thinking among Indigenous peoples about exactly these types of crises for a long, long time. And many of the types of foundations of the difficulties that we face now in planetary health and other linked areas can be found in Western colonisation, in capitalism, in globalisation. And it then brought to mind a quote from a very well-known quote from a leading global thinker, Einstein, that we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. And so this, I think, this really supports the view that I have and the view that is expressed in the Charter about the value of Indigenous knowledge and thinking in addressing the wellbeing crisis that we're facing. But Sione has already referred to our leading thinker, Dr. Moana Jackson, who contributed so much. And this is a quote from him. Among the many brutal things that colonisation has done to Indigenous peoples, it has been to convince Indigenous peoples that there is indeed only one way of seeing the world, only one knowledge system. But despite that, there has been enough Māori knowledge maintained that it can provide a huge opportunity for us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to not only provide the basis for Māori health promotion, but of course for some of the principles that come out of Māori health promotion to be applied in health promotion across the board. And of course we see that in areas like whānau ora, where that Māori concept has been widely socialised and is being applied in health promotion. So the Rockefeller Foundation and Lancet Commission on Planetary Health identified as one of the issues that is undermining our work on planetary health as conceptual failure. So having too narrow a view conceptually of where our solutions might lie. And so if we think at the conceptual level, Indigenous wellbeing, the Charter moves towards Indigenous concepts of wellbeing, which we're all familiar with, the idea that wellbeing is achieved through a balance of interacting dimensions, emphasis on a spiritual dimension. We're talking about wellbeing not only at the level of the individual, but also collectives, and that it's a relational concept. So, for example, that identity is derived from the natural environment and the importance of Papatuanuku planetary well-being, and also that the concept of time is important. So that brings in concepts like intergenerational or generational equity. So we need to always keep at the forefront the well-being of future generations. So the Charter begins to embrace this broader view of well-being, which is a view that's entirely consistent with Indigenous ways of thinking. The Charter also talks about planetary health, and the IUHP conference that was hosted in Aotearoa just 2-3 years ago, and really driven a lot by the Health Promotion Forum. Out of that, Sione mentioned the Waiora Declaration, and it provides a concept of planetary health that even goes beyond what the way that it's conceptualised in the Charter. And so that is that from an Indigenous point of view, in the Waiora Declaration, it talks about the well-being of Mother Earth and humanity as part of the natural ecosystems. So we don't focus on planetary health for the benefit of humanity, that in its own right, in its own right, the well-being of the planet is what we should be aiming towards. And also knowing our place within that wider system. We're part of natural ecosystems. So Indigenous views of planetary health are relational. They're based on a reverence for the natural environment and values like sustainability, guardianship, and love. And as I mentioned before, planetary health, like other issues, a lot of the problems that we have are founded in colonisation, capitalism, and globalisation. Indigenous concepts are also, or Indigenous concepts, we can talk about them in their entirety, but we can also look at practical examples of the way these concepts or principles are having an influence in all kinds of different areas. And one of those is the economy. So Kate Raworth, I'm not sure how you pronounce her last name, she spoke at the WHO conference that this charter came out of. She was a plenary speaker, and her work is around what she refers to as donut economics. And it's basically about having economies that enable societies to meet the basics or the essentials for everyone. So that's food, housing, healthcare, having a political voice. So meeting those basics, but within the means of our planet. So not at the expense of the planet. So having limits set. And this way of thinking is cutting edge globally, which of course is one of the reasons why Kate was a plenary speaker at the recent conference. But at the same time, you know, this kind of thinking has been the basis of Indigenous people's activism for many years. And Kate, in the presentation that she gave at the conference, actually pointed out that she mentioned the wellbeing, the emerging wellbeing economy, the Treasury framework in this country, and how it was heavily influenced by Māori principles and concepts of wellbeing. So Kate's familiar with how we roll here. not that long ago, she was presenting about 80 kilometres from where I am in Taranaki in New Plymouth at a hui on for the Just Transition Summit. And I wasn't able to attend, unfortunately, but my husband, who's also in the field of public health, was able to participate. And, you know, we had a good talk afterwards how the thinking in the donut economy fully resonates with Indigenous views. So something else which I wanted to mention here, because in the Charter it talks about the value of education, you know, as part of strategies. And I think we've got a lot of reason to be hopeful about the New Zealand Histories curriculum that's being rolled out, that has a strong focus on critical citizenship. So understanding and making sense of the past, and then using that knowledge and that understanding to inform our future actions and decisions. So they talk about the histories curriculum as providing understanding about the big ideas in Aotearoa New Zealand histories, knowing the national, regional and local context, and then doing. So, as I said, thinking critically about the past and then using that to inform decisions in the future. And that it's about learning that cannot be left to chance is one of the catchphrases. So with the delivery of the New Zealand Histories curriculum, we're really on the cusp of a new generation who have a raised critical awareness of the history of Aotearoa New Zealand, and so can be more informed and get over that mental block that many in my generation and surrounding generations have around acknowledging and being able to engage in conversations about our shared history. And the image that I've got there is from Parihaka, and it was the welcome to prisoners that had been returning. I think it was from imprisonment in Dunedin and other places, following, you know, subsequent to the Pāhua, the invasion of Parihaka. So I think that's one reason to be very hopeful. And I just want to end here by saying this is kind of, I guess, renewing the call that came out of the IUHPE conference here and the Waiora Declaration, which is around the need for a conceptual or a paradigm shift, and realising that we in this country have so much to share, and that we're really ahead of the game in a lot of our thinking. And the value of the Charter, to me, a major value is to help shift thinking along globally in a way that's more consistent with how we are thinking here, and also to give credibility to those wider views of what is well-being, what is planetary health, and what that means in health promotion action. So the Waiora Declaration called for a paradigm shift, acknowledgement of the value and enabling Indigenous leadership, and applying Indigenous knowledge. But in applying Indigenous knowledge and generating Indigenous knowledge, it's not about strip mining, of course, because the context is so important to understanding and applying that knowledge. A shift towards well-being economies, understanding that we're interdependent and interconnected, but not only understanding it at an intellectual level, but actually acting like it. And at the presentation workshop that Sione and Grant and others did at the WHO conference, Grant talked about moving from the I and the me way of thinking to the us and the we way of thinking, and I really liked that. And also, and we've learned a lot about this in our experience of COVID, but the importance of resource flow that's informed by local intelligence and the lived realities of people on the ground to direct resource flow to enabling communities to be self-determined and drive their own solutions to the issues that they face. So, so I think the bottom line is that the Charter is useful, but that we really need to back ourselves as being on the right track and continuing down this pathway. And that's a pathway that the Health Promotion Forum has strongly advocated for and supported for a long time. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Mihi, thank you. That was amazing. I almost forgot to do my job just for a little bit. We'll move on to our next speaker, just because I want to write some questions down. So reminder to our viewers, if you have questions, put them in the chat. I know I put my question, I'll save that one for later. But we'll move on to our next speaker, which is Dr. Viliame Puloka. He's currently in Tonga. He went there to help out some whānau, and he's been asked by MOH to support Tonga with their COVID response. He's the former Director of Health Promotion and Non-Communicable Diseases in Tonga. He's a research fellow at the School of Public Health at Otago Uni. He is the Chair and Regional Vice President of the IUHPE Southwest Pacific Region Committee, and he is an opera singer, so he will probably sing if you ask him. If someone asks that, put that in the chat, he will probably do that. So kia ora, Viliame.
Okay, you didn't mention that I'm not very good with IT. Can you all see my my slide there?
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much, Mariana. And thank you, Mihi, for covering all the things that I wanted to say. And I think it just confirmed that, that we are all in the same category of the way people are classifying us, the way we think, and so forth. I'm just going to be very brief. I only have a couple of slides here to share. And actually, basically, it's the same thing that Mihi has gone through. And this is really the indigenous kind of cultural values and the thinking that we people in the Pacific, of course, Maori are part of the Pacific, and New Zealand actually part of the Pacific. I just want to remind you that. Pacific is not part of New Zealand. New Zealand is a tiny island in the vast ocean of the Pacific, and you are part of us. In any case, before I go into that, thank you, Sione, for the outlining of the different charters, but I thought it was interesting to see that the Ottawa Charter in 1986, and of course we all knew, I was just fresh out of the medical school then, start working here in Tonga, and there was a team come here from Australia, and we trotted around, well, we sailed around the islands here in Tonga, tried to capture some images in preparing for Health for All by year 2000. And so this was after the Ottawa Charter was developed, and the focus, of course, of the Ottawa Charter is preparing for Health for All by year 2000. And, but interestingly, this is when the first time the world was brought into the thinking of health promotion and thinking of health, not just from the perspective of a disease, but rather thinking of health with all the other determinants. And this is when the thinking about health determinants started to emerge way back then in 1986. When it came to the Bangkok Charter, actually I was there at the meeting at the time, 2005. And the Bangkok Charter was basically a response to how the world in those days has developed or has evolved. And this is really the time where they realize the whole world have just been focusing so much on communicable diseases. Diseases are infectious, spread by organisms or vector as mosquito and so forth. So the whole focus, and we were getting very good. The whole world was getting very good in dealing with communicable diseases. But then emerges non-communicable diseases, which is not really depending on the skill and the efficiency of the doctors in the hospital, but more of a personal responsibility because it's really lifestyle related. And that's when the time we were beginning to think about both communicable and non-communicable diseases. And one interesting thing that I noted in, I think it was the speech of the Prime Minister of Bangkok at the time, he was stressing that, you know, with all the degradation of the environment and all the focus on infectious disease, now we begin to think about lifestyle. But then he said that we are not just interested in repairing health, but rebuilding health. And I think Sione has touched a bit on that one. And I think this is important. This is the way the health promotion people and thinking are coming up with those ideas. And of course, in talking about the Geneva Charter, the emphasis has been on well-being, being well. And of course, to start well, stay well, and finish well. I think, you know, Maori and Pacific, we're always very good in starting well. Not too sure about staying well, but oftentimes we end well, whatever the ending may be. But I think it's important in our thinking about health promotion now with the idea that now that we're not just thinking about being well at the beginning, but to stay well throughout. And of course, that will determine how we end up well. And of course, there's so many things in between that distracts us. And one thing that I noticed there, when we developed, or when these charters were developed, it seems that they, of course, most of the people who developed it were European. And we can see right through the Eurocentric focus in the way they thinking it. And it was like a set of rods that you put together, and then you try to, it's like a piece of music that you play. And then each of us try to dance according to that music. The way I see the indigenous people is, it's just their real way of living in life. They live it out. And then we just come in and look at those things, the way they're thinking, you know, the respect for Mother Nature. It's not something separate from themselves, because they grow up and they have to respect Mother Nature. Otherwise, Mother Nature will beat the heck out of them. You know, it's like what is being, someone said that the war that we are raging against nature is the war we cannot win. It's suicidal. And I think indigenous thinking, indigenous people understand that, you know, and it's part of the reason why they respect Mother Nature, because that's the whole livelihood. There is a constant connection, and they are constantly informed by Mother Nature. It's not vice versa. It's not that they want to do something and then want Mother Nature to follow that, whatever the action is. And that's the significance of interdependence. In the Western thinking, before you're 18, you're kicked out of the house. You have to go look for yourself, do your own thing. And it's a sign of success. And you are praised for being independent. Do your own thing. You stand on your 2 feet. In the Pacific culture and indigenous culture, it's not the same way. Actually, it's honorable for you to remain connected to Mother Nature and to the rest of the whānau. You are depending on each other, knowing the resources is very limited. And you cannot do everything. You depend on others. The farmers will supply the fish, and the fishermen will supply the banana or kumara. So you have to be nice and keep a relationship, which is another point is very, very important. We have to keep the relationship because we maintain you cannot just walk up to somebody and ask for something if you didn't have a relationship with that person. It's the same way when we treat the environment and everything in it. We cannot expect it to yield itself to you unless you have kept up your part of the deal. And of course, the kind of language that we're using as me is related to, the pronouns is always we, us, ours. It's not really mine and I and all that. And our way of making decisions is almost always consensus. It's not always that we all agree, but we agree to disagree, and we do what is best for the collective, for the community. Part of my job currently here is working on communication strategy here to calm down the people here in Tonga with COVID-19 and sort of risk management type of communication. And it's amazing how many times we have to stress to them that actually the individual actions matters most. Because all the things that we're asking for, the government cannot do it, the ministry cannot do it. It doesn't matter where you went to medical school or how beautiful your hospital is. You have to wash your own hands. You have to put on your own mask. You have to keep the distance. So it's back the question, and people always say, okay, whose responsibility is health is? Of course, government, Ministry of Health, the corporates, the society are the one to provide enabling, empowering environments. But by and large, many of the things that we have to do to start well with health, to stay well with health, and to end well with health is a personal responsibility. Each of us. And we can only do that if we have the thinking that we do respect others, including the trees, and the rivers, and the mountain, and the rocks, and everything else. And that is where spirituality is very important in our indigenous thinking. And this is not meaning what church or congregation you attend, but the respect for higher being, for a spiritual realm. And as you know, many of the indigenous people, the real and the unreal world is just as real as the real world. And this is where myths and legends and all those things, those are important in our lives. And that's how we kept our understanding and our relationship with the environment. And because of all those traditions that's been passed down through stories and through the myths and legends. And that's part and parcel of all this spirituality business that is so important for us as indigenous people. I think this is some of the idea of the thing. And I think for me, it's the way of thinking that we have to address, and that will translate to being. And our being will lead us to act accordingly because of all the value that we have and the way we think, the appreciation we have and the relationship we keep, whether with other people or with Mother Nature. But those are the kind of things that to me, it really helps. And I see it in my practice, especially now with the pandemic here in Tonga. It's so we used to have a lockdown here and there and restriction here and there. But it's so important for when people have the understanding that when they are doing it for themselves, they are yielding the good fruit themselves, but the ripple effects shares throughout the community and everyone. And I think for health promotion with this charter of Geneva Charter, it's so important, because this is really for us to recognize the importance of the interconnectedness and the interdependence as human beings and the rest of the environment. I think I better stop there. Happy to answer any question. Malo pito.
Kia ora, Viriami, thank you. We've had a few questions come in, but before I throw it over to Lavinia, is there any other key points that our presenters wanted to speak about before we go into, we've had a couple of questions.
Miranda, you might want to give an opportunity to Professor Louis Signal, whether
yes,
you'd like to make some remarks as well, and then we can look at the questions. There are a few things in my head, you know, that resonates with what Mihi and Viriami talk about, but I think we can weave all of that into the questions that our participants have put on the chat box.
Ka pai, is Professor Louise going to have a kōrero with us?
Yes, I'd just like to invite you, Louise, if you have any remarks at this point to make. Otherwise, we can address the questions. Yeah, back to you, Miranda. Let's start with the questions now.
I'll read the question out, Lavinia. We've had one from Coral, and she said, Kia ora koutou. I'm keen to hear from the presenters and others on how this kaupapa is represented in the transition unit as the health system moves to Health New Zealand and Māori Health Authority.
Mihi, would you like to go first? Any insights from you?
It would have been great if Catherine Clark was here, because she's been actually involved, I think, on behalf of Te Herenga Hauora, the Health Promotion Agency, within, I think she might be on secondment within the transition unit. So what I would say is that it isn't like there is no awareness that these kaupapa, like, you know, taking a broader approach to well-being, the importance of planetary health. There's no lack of awareness that these are really critical issues to address. I suspect, though, when it comes down to actually the logistics of making the reforms happen, that it will be an ongoing challenge. I haven't myself been involved, you know, in the transition unit, so I can't really provide any, you know, any detail. I would just say that from the outside, I think that because the idea is that the reforms are going to have a much stronger public health focus within the system, that would naturally lead on to issues of wellbeing and planetary health being much higher on the agenda than they would otherwise be. I think that's probably all that I can say. Louise might have a comment here too, if she's here.
Kia ora koutou. It was wonderful to hear from you all. Thank you so much. Nice to see you, Mihi. It's been a while, I think. Yeah, I was just typing a note to say I really am appreciating hearing from you all, and it's very neat to see the leadership. I think you're right, Mihi. We have a really unique role here in New Zealand in leading in this space, and I tautoko your three talks. Love you to see, Viliami. I hope you're keeping well and things are improving for you day in Tonga. So I have to run now, but take good care, everybody. Lovely to see you all.
Thank you, Louise. I can add on a bit to the reform and structures that are emerging. I have been invited to some of the spaces, consultation on the reform, and structures. One aspect that I was invited to is to input into the type of leadership that needs to be in place to match up with the structure. And there have been quite a number of input to make sure that it is not just about structural change, it is about cultural change. You know, it's all okay to have a structure, but we want to make sure that the culture within that structure, meaning the values, the processes, the policies, the personnel recruited, and the practices need to align well with the lofty goal of the exercise of the reform, and to make that defining difference we all want to see. So a leadership that is an embodiment of the values we talk about. It's a leadership for our well-being. It's a leadership for all. It's for equity. So I think enough words have been put into that space for the transition unit to really think about the kind of leadership at all levels, not just the top, but at all levels. Sometimes the bottleneck comes at the lower levels, sometimes at the top. The emphasis has been at all levels, and making sure it's collective leadership for collective well-being. Specifically, Maori leadership, and to address the Te Tiriti obligations, that were brought up many times. Mihi mentioned Grant. I have been in few spaces with Grant. Some of you who may know, who may not know, Grant Bergen is the CEO of the Public Health Association. I have also been party to another group looking at the infrastructure, and we will continue to meet. The infrastructure is important. What is the structure? Is it the right one? And who is going to inherit those spaces, and what authority you gain and how to use it? And we also acknowledge this is only the beginning of the transformation. It is not the end. You know, we are just building the structure, but operating the structure is equally important. So once it's up, we will continue to have a dialogue. It was very clear from the beginning, as Boyd Swinburne said in an open letter, that the reform is very much about the 20%, the hospitals, you know, the health, the treatment. It is not about the other 20%, which are the determinants of health, which are in other sectors. So the reinforcement of the argument for a stronger public health, came about as a result of those in the public health sector who have been very clear and vocal about, how the reform should shape up. From where I sit, I see that voice has actually helped to some degree in bringing to the fore the role of public health, and hence the strengthening up of the public health agency. As you know, the health promotion agency is within the public health agency, and we'll continue to watch that space. But those are some of my reflections on the consultation and the advisory groups that I've been part of, inputting to the shaping up of the reform and the structure that is now put in place. But it's ongoing, as I said. The infrastructure group that I'm part of, we continue to meet and to input, into the transition. And in these spaces, the members of the transition unit, from the senior to intermediate level, they come in and interface with us, who give advice, whether it's a Pacific lens or Maori lens or a particular discipline within the broad health sector. Those are my remarks, a response to the question, Mariana. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you. We've got another question as well for all three of you. It's from Shanita Whittle. She says, kia ora koutou, in terms of the Geneva Charter and the delivery of this kaupapa here in Aotearoa, how can we implement it here? How do our speakers see this being delivered to our wider whānau, hapori, iwi, and hapu?
Would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you, Sione. Well, you know, what I would say is I think that we are here in Māori Health Promotion and in our, you know, kind of general health promotion action, I see that we're kind of, you know, quite ahead and have a leadership role in our thinking. And so I think as far as I'll talk from a Māori health promotion perspective, I think that the work that we are already doing is on point, and it's continuing to try and make a difference at all levels, so that on the ground Māori health promotion, the political activism, you know, all of the things that we're already doing. I don't think from a Māori health promotion point of view, the Charter really provides a new approach for us. But what I think it does is it helps to provide some legitimacy, you know, as a formal declaration statement that's come out of the World Health Organization that we can leverage off in the work that we do, that we are already doing. So I think it's useful in that sense. And I think maybe that that what we can do is provide leadership for other countries and globally in the type of thinking and action that we take. But I mean, you know, and as we all know, it's a really difficult area to make progress in around planetary health. But yeah, I think that that's the way that the Charter is most useful to us, and leveraging off it and, you know, providing some further evidence of the legitimacy of the approaches that we're already taking.
I'd like to go next, and then Mariana, if you do not mind. Yeah, two things for me, two major points. The first one is to just endorse what Mihi has said. We are actually leading, and we are doing really well. And we are sharing our experience with the rest of the world. And the world is turning now to Indigenous peoples, not just us here in Aotearoa, but to other Indigenous communities around the world. But within that collective of the Indigenous community, we are at the cutting edge, not just in health promotion, but in a number of fronts, whether it's human rights, whether it's community development, whether it's economic development and economic well-being, or whether it's in health, and leadership as well, very important. So for me, it's to continue to do what we are doing. We are on the right track. We have the right knowledge, and we continue to have a big aroha in our heart and to share that with the rest of the world. Because as the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has said just recently, but also in 2020, in his State of the Planet address, the planet is broken because humanity is waging war at nature. And I can add to that, we are waging war with each other as well. You know, that's the first big mistake. And he also said that we turn to Indigenous peoples for their knowledge. As you know, 80% of the biodiversity on land in the world now exists within the landmass, 20% only of where indigenous communities around the world live. It shows how wise we are, how one we are with Mother Nature. And Mihi has already mentioned some wonderful frameworks, some wonderful policies that are already in place. Whanawara, for instance. They are not the beginning. They are only a reframing and reflection of the way we have been living for eons, especially in this part of the world, the Moananui Kiwa. So I'm sharing also based on my Tongan indigenous perspectives. So that's my first point, but perhaps the second point is to remember that we are part of a very globalized society. We are in a one global village. And so if we share our knowledge with the rest of our fellow global villages, it's all for the better of the collective, of the whole. Mihi and Wiliami spoke to our values of it's about the we, not the me and the I. We may not be too true to ourselves if we don't share our knowledge, but at the same time that we be wise to make sure that our knowledge are used for the right reasons and not poached and taken away at our peril. It's about walking together. Semes and Dori has been reminding us a few decades now that we be Maori or be Pacifica, but we are also global citizens. We are part of the humanity. And this process that I outlined in my background earlier is a story of how indigenous peoples have used the platform of health promotion to put forward some of the things that they are good at, leadership, knowledge, share that generously with within our health promotion system, especially in the International Union for Health Promotion and Education, and help to begin to transform that organization to embrace and embed into its core indigenous knowledge, but also acknowledge indigenous leadership. And that was very evidential when WHO and IHPE came to Rotorua. It's a small contribution, but it's making some inroads. And then we learn from that. And now it has influenced the Geneva Charter. As I mentioned, we see our knowledge within, and our leadership is mentioned. And we are party to building a whare that will embrace humanity, including indigenous peoples, and including all of us here in Aotearoa. That's our reality in the 21st century today. And we will continue to lead with humility, but very assertive and courageous towards what is right and what is the right cause. So those are those 2 points. We are indigenous, but we are also global citizens, and we have our role to play, and the world is turning to us, and let us continue to contribute and share with our fellow human beings. And we are in the right direction, as Mihi said. That's me, Berana. I'll pass it on to Liami.
Thank you, Sione. And I just have a very, just a couple of points to make. And as Mihi said, this is really an endorsement of what we are already practicing here in Aotearoa, in our part of the world. And I think this is really great to validate the one. I just want to give an example of very practical steps that we have taken in health promotion. Actually, there are a couple of things that we have done that already. It was before the COVID came in. We were allowed 1 day a week to work from home. And that was basically to save the environment and the hectic of driving and so forth. So that was just a little thing that we decided in our own little organization, and there are only about what, 8, 9 of us at that time. We did that. So one day a week. Alternatively, some of us are not contributing. We are cutting down on our carbon footprint, and that is something that we already done. And then along with that, we also have what we call is wellness. I'm not sure exactly how do you call it, but it's a little money that they give us annually at your birthday of joining the organization. You have a bit of money to spend on your wellness. And I think that's just little practical things that we can do and begin with us. And of course, I was very disappointed when Mariana joined us. Maybe it was not Mariana's fault, but we decided to not to print any more of those things because we go e-copy to save the trees. You know, those are some of the little practical things that, depending on what you are doing with your little organization, there are things, of course, and then Emma is always keen to have us walk and climb the mountain and walk the park and all this as a team. But even though those little steps, but it's a statement of what value that we keep in our organization. So I would urge those other small organizations like us, actually, there are many steps that you can take, making a statement of the value that you are keeping, looking at planetary health. Malo.
Can I just add something else there?
Yeah, kia ora. Yep.
I'm not sure, I can't remember whether this was associated with this question or it's another one that was on the chat, which was about how you implement the charter when working with whānau hapu and iwi. And you know, there's the 5 areas they identify in the charter as like areas for action, you know, value, respect, nurture, planet Earth and its ecosystems. You know, they're really about, when I say continuing to do what we do, it's about supporting communities in the areas that they are seeking support in and the areas that they want to make a difference in, you know, so it's what we do anyway. But implementing the charter, there's different actions at different levels, obviously. So at the community level, it's supporting the aspirations of the community. They take the leadership role, we take the support role. But then when you go to global organisations like the World Health Organization, you know, while they come out with documents like this, there's so many issues that they need to address themselves that you know, haven't changed so much over many years. I worked for WHO in Geneva, probably going back 20, 25 years ago. And I went there to prepare the background document for their 1999 consultation on Indigenous people's health. And when I had finished that piece of work, I was just about to leave the department that I was in. The director of the department called in my colleague, whose responsibility, she was non-Indigenous, her responsibility was to organise the logistics of the conference, and called her in and said she'd done a great job on the report. And she, of course, said, but I had nothing to do with it. I do the administration, you know, it's Mihi that did it. And then I got called in, and the feedback that I got was, even though it had nothing to do with the director, obviously, the time you've been at WHO, your skills have hugely developed to be able to write this report. But I had no support from the organisation. You know, I'd gone in with a pre-existing skill set that had enabled me to complete what it was they wanted. But it was that whole kind of colonial mindset. And then I would say that when I presented at the conference in December, I was a little bit disappointed because we had a fantastic panel. The other panelists were amazing. And the panel was facilitated by a kind of, you know, world-leading journalist, great at doing that stuff, but with no content knowledge whatsoever of the topic. And so the questions were continually directed at very, very low level. And it was a struggle to try and, in responding to the questions, try and lift it up a bit. And so that tells me that, you know, there's still that kind of colonial mindset of very low expectations of Indigenous peoples and the contribution that our knowledge can make. So bringing this back to my point, what health promotion, Indigenous health promotion, Māori health promotion, what that looks like in applying the Charter is going to be very different at different levels. Community level, supporting the aspirations of communities. Global organisations applying this Charter is going to be about continuing to advocate and the lobby for the legitimacy and value of Indigenous knowledge in creating change for planetary health and the value that it has globally. And then, you know, national level, it's just going to have a different look and feel to it, as we all know, you know, for the different levels that we work at. But we just go back to basic principles.
Kia ora. Thank you, Mihi.
Miranda, if I may add on something to...
Of course, Yoni.
Responding to, you know, what Mihi said, I relate to what she shared in those international structures. But one of the lessons that I have learned from my, small island Indigenous thinking that I grew up with is that whatever you participate in, you shape it. Do not allow the system to shape you. You shape the system. And that's the thinking behind the Health Promotion Forum, joining the International Union for Health Promotion with our own agenda that is useful to everyone, the well-being of the planet and human rights, especially the rights of Indigenous peoples. And we took it to IUHBE, and we influenced the organization. And so they agreed that we co-host the conference. They agreed to have Tereo as one of the 4 official languages of the conference. Everything was organized according to Te Tiriti. It's about partnership and equal power. So there was a co-chair in everything to ensure that there is an Indigenous voice in the whole process. As Mihi might recall, when it came to the opening plenary speakers, Sam Mason Dury was the first speaker, and then Professor Fran Baum from a good colleague of ours from Australia. And every bit was shaped by Te Tiriti. And IUHBE saw that we can do things like that. And they saw the first time how Indigenous knowledge is operationalized, and so it opened up the mind and the heart to accept Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous thinking into the organization. And as I mentioned earlier, the strategic plan of IUHBE for the next 5 years has incorporated some of the things we talk about in a very systematic, strategic way. It will shape the organization in the future. And when WHO look around for this theme of well-being and to see what might be the theme, what might be a charter that will speak to the reality of the 21st century, they turn to its co-worker, the IUHBE, and they saw what we have done there, establishing the Waiora Planetary Health and Human Wellbeing Working Group, which is the body that is advancing the 2 legacy statements that I mentioned before. And because the same delegation came, we invited them to our conference in 2019, they embraced what was in IUHBE and what was in the 2 legacy statements. And that helped to, for the invitation of of the Health Promotion Forum, it helped to incorporate some of our thinking into the charter. So I think a lesson from what we are talking about today in the last 20, 30 years or so is that as I mentioned earlier, we shape the future we want to walk into. at whatever level it is, you know, whānau, you know, hapu, community, the nation, and the world, you know, we are as good as anybody else. You know, we are endowed with the same human qualities as any other human being. And it's about time that we contribute that at any level. And I say that so that we know that there is greatness in us, and we need to share that with the rest of humanity. Because when, as you can see from the interrelated crises that we are facing, whether it's the economy, the environment, geopolitical conflict, pandemics, we need, as Mihi said earlier, we need to elevate the consciousness. We need a new paradigm. And a major component of that paradigm rests within the world of indigeneity. And we need to give that to the world. And that's the mission that the Health Promotion Forum has been about. But it's not about the international level only. We did that, as I mentioned before, also for the co-benefit, you know, co-benefits for Aotearoa, New Zealand. You know, as Briami and Mihi said, what the Charter has done is to kind of validate in other people's eyes, you know, the efficacy of our knowledge and our experience, and we can give that in the right way, and let's see to it that they use it in the right way too, you know, and maintain an ethical work relationship, and we can help the world. But also it is a lever that we can use at the national level and in international level. And let's journey together and continue to work together. So a practical application, you know, at the ground level is to continue to do what we are doing, you know, and you know, do more and share our, you know, our knowledge. Yeah, those are some of the things that come to mind, Miranda, you know, sparked by what Mihi shared earlier.